Hello students and welcome to the lecture of monosaccharides. I am Harshita and today I am going to teach you in detail about various monosaccharides. The objectives of this lecture is to get detailed knowledge about various types of monosaccharides, their classifications, their structures and functions. In this lecture, we are going to have a basic introduction to what monosaccharides are, how they can be classified and subclassified, and what are the various types of monosaccharides. And we are going to talk in detail about glucose, which is the most important example of carbohydrate, galactose, fructose, and we are going to talk about their structures, functions, and their importance. Now, before we move further with monosaccharides, we must revise the classifications of carbohydrates as we also discussed in the last lecture, which was Introduction to Carbohydrates. So, as we know, carbohydrates can be classified on the basis of sugar units present in them broadly into four types. These are monosaccharides, which has a single sugar molecule. The most important monosaccharides are glucose, fructose, and galactose. Then there are disaccharides made up of two monosaccharide units linked together via a glycosidic bond. There are oligosaccharides, which are carbohydrates having 2 to 10 monosaccharide units joined together. And disaccharides of most importance are sucrose, lactose, and maltose. We must keep in mind that disaccharides can also be classified under oligosaccharides rather than being classified separately. And at last, there are polysaccharides, in which more than 10 monosaccharides are linked together to form long chains via glycosidic bond. Most important polysaccharides are starch, glycogen, and cellulose. And in this lecture, we are going to learn about various structures, types of monosaccharides and their structures, their formula, and their importance. So in this video, we are going to talk about the first classification of carbohydrates, which is monosaccharides. Let's start with that. The word mono means one and the word saccharides means sugar. Therefore, monosaccharides are carbohydrates having a single sugar molecule. The first monosaccharide is glucose, which is a monosaccharide with 6 carbons, which means it is a hexose sugar. This is the cyclic form of glucose and it is also present in linear form. So this is how it looks like, and this is the alpha form of glucose with the hydroxy group pointing down on carbon 1, and this is carbon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. The chemical formula of glucose is C6H12O6. And we know that carbohydrates have an empirical formula of CH2O. That is carbon and hydrate, which is carbohydrate. Now let's move to fructose. So fructose makes a 5-member ring in its cyclic form, but it also has the same formula as glucose, which is C6H12O6. And its structure is like this. So fructose is a ketohexose because it has ketone group attached to it, while glucose is an aldohexose, which means it has an aldehyde group attached to it. So glucose and fructose are isomers of each other. That is, they have the same chemical formula, which is C6H12O6, but they still possess different structures. This is glucose and this is fructose. Now, the formula is C6H12O6 for both of them. Now, another monosaccharide you need to be familiar with is galactose. So, glucose and galactose are very similar. They both form 6-member rings and they are both aldohexoses, that is, they both have aldehyde group present in them. There is one small difference between glucose and galactose. Can you see it? So they differ at carbon 4. At carbon 4, the hydroxyl group is pointing up at galactose. At glucose, it is pointing downwards, as you can see. Rest, everything is same. So glucose and galactose are known as stereoisomers of each other, which means they have the same chemical formula. Their atoms are joined together in the same way. They have same functional group, but the only difference is the way they have their hydroxyl group attached at one carbon, which is carbon 4. So this was galactose. And galactose is known as the C4 epimer of glucose because it differs at carbon 4. They are only different at one carbon atom, not at 2 or more carbons, just one. So they are called epimers. Now, the next sugar we are going to draw is ribose, which is a pentose sugar. It is a 5 carbon sugar and it also forms a 5-membered ring. So let's make the structure of ribose. So we must know that ribose is the sugar that is found in nucleic acids such as RNA, which is ribonucleic acid. Now another 5 carbon structure means pentose sugar is deoxyribose. Now look at these structures. There is a small difference between both the structures, and which is difference in the hydroxyl group. Here the hydroxyl group is replaced with hydrogen in deoxyribose. So that is why it is called deoxyribose. Deoxyribose is found in DNA, that is deoxyribonucleic acid. So these are the 2 sugars you should know. Now the simplest monosaccharide is glyceraldehyde. It has only 3 carbon atoms present in it. Here's the structure. And now let's move to the detailed classification and other detailed information about monosaccharides. So what are monosaccharides? So monosaccharides are the simplest group of carbohydrates which can be referred to as single sugars or simple sugars because they have just a single molecule of carbohydrate present in them, which also means that they cannot be hydrolyzed or broken down any further. They form the basic unit or building block for other complex carbohydrates such as disaccharides, oligosaccharides or polysaccharides. Let's now see how are monosaccharides classified. So, monosaccharides can be further classified on the basis of either number of carbon atoms present or by the nature of functional group attached to it, that is aldehyde or ketone. If a monosaccharide has aldehyde attached to it as the functional group, it will be known as aldose, while a monosaccharide containing a ketone group will be known as a ketose. And on the basis of number of carbon atoms present, they can be trioses, that is a monosaccharide having 3 carbon atoms in it. Glyceride is an example of aldose having 3 carbon atoms. Now another example is dihydroxyacetone, which is a ketose sugar having 3 carbon atoms. Now tetroses are monosaccharides having 4 carbon atoms present in it, and its examples are erythrose and erythrolose, out of which erythrose is an aldose sugar, erythrolose is a ketose sugar. If we talk about pentoses, so monosaccharides having 5 carbon atoms are known as pentoses. Its examples are ribose and ribulose, out of which ribose is an aldose sugar, while ribulose is a ketose sugar. Now if we talk about hexoses, so monosaccharides having 6 carbon atoms in them are known as hexoses. Examples are glucose, which is an aldose sugar having 6 carbon atoms, and fructose, which is a ketose sugar. It means it has ketone functional group attached to it having 6 carbon atoms. Similarly, there are heptoses, which has 7 carbon atoms present in them, and examples are glucoheptose, which is an aldose, and pseudoheptose, which is a ketose. Now, before we learn about the various structures and isomerisms present in monosaccharides and other carbohydrates, we must understand what is asymmetric carbon atom. As you all must be knowing that carbon is tetrahedral, meaning it has a valency of 4. So, the carbon atom attached to 4 different groups is called asymmetric carbon atom. We are reading about this because all monosaccharides have it, except dihydroxyacetone. So isomerism is possible based on the presence of the number of asymmetric carbon atoms. Now, what is isomerism? Before that, we must know what are isomers. So, isomers are molecules that have identical molecular formulas but still have different structures. For example, both glucose and fructose have same molecular formula, which is C6H12O6, but they still have different structures. So these are isomers of each other. Now, talking about D and L isomerism, most commonly seen in carbohydrates, it is based on the orientation of hydrogen and hydroxyl group around the subterminal carbon atom. When hydroxyl group is on the right side of the sugar, it is D isomer or dextrorotatory isomer, and when it is on the left side, it's the L isomer or levorotatory isomer. Here in this slide you can see the simple monosaccharide showing D and L isomerism. The first one is a D-glyceraldehyde having the hydroxyl group at the right side and at the second carbon, and while the second structure has hydroxyl group at left side, which means it is an L-glyceraldehyde. Now, what are epimers? Isomers which have a variation of configuration of the hydroxyl group on any one carbon other than the subterminal carbon are called epimers. We must remember that glucose and galactose are epimers of each other formed by epimerization at carbon 4, which means the difference is there in the carbon 4. The hydroxyl group in glucose is at the right side while it is on the left side in galactose. So when carbohydrates are dissolved in water, they form ring structures. For this formation, the linear structure has to undergo rotation. The carbon atom around which this rotation occurs is known as the anomeric carbon. The ring structure of an aldose is known as hemiacetal, and that of a ketose is known as hemiketal. The rings can have two structures, that is alpha and beta structures, on the basis of the position of hydroxyl group on the first carbon atom. If the hydroxyl group on the first carbon atom is pointing downwards, it is an alpha isomer, and if the hydroxyl group is pointing upwards, it is known as a beta isomer. So these alpha and beta isomers are known as epimers of each other. Here you can see in the first structure, which is of an alpha D glucose, the hydroxyl group at the first carbon is pointing downwards. And in the second structure, which is beta D glucose, the hydroxyl group at the first carbon atom is pointing upwards. Now, let's come to the most important example of monosaccharide, which is glucose. So, glucose is the main source of energy for most organisms, and it is a hexose sugar. And what does this mean? It means that it has 6 carbon atoms in it, and also It is an aldose sugar because it has aldehyde functional group. Its chemical formula is C6H12O6. If we talk about its structure, it can exist in both straight chain and ring form. And here are the structures of glucose in both straight chain and rings, as you can see on the right side of the screen. Now, occurrence and important. So, glucose occurs as a constituent of polysaccharides and monosaccharides. They are found in fruits also, and they are of diagnostic importance in diabetes, as in diabetes they are excreted in urine. They are also structural units of cellulose in plants. Now let's talk about galactose, which is known as milk sugar, as it forms lactose, which is a component of milk. Here are chain structures of galactose, and it has the same chemical formula as glucose, which is C6H12O6, but it differs in structure. The position of hydroxy group around the fourth carbon is different, making them epimers of each other. Let's come to another important monosaccharide, which is fructose, and it also has the same chemical formula as glucose and galactose, which is C6H12O6 again, but the functional group is ketone here, which means it is a keto sugar, while glucose and galactose were aldose sugars. So, fructose occurs in fruits such as apples, and it also occurs in honey. It is a constituent of sucrose and inulin, which are polysaccharides, and you can see the structure at right side of the screen. So what did we learn today? In today's lecture, we learned that monosaccharides are single sugars, or also known as simple sugars. They can be further classified either on the basis of number of carbon atoms or on the basis of functional group attached to them. And D-glucose is the most commonly occurring monosaccharide, and monosaccharides form the basis of oligosaccharides and polysaccharides. Now, these are the references for further readings. You can refer to these textbooks. Thank you.